Eli had spent most of his life chasing numbers, properties, and deals. He was the kind of man who woke up before sunrise, checked the market before breakfast, and spent his evenings reviewing contracts instead of watching TV. His neighbors called him hardworking, but if you looked closer, you'd see something else behind his calm expression: loneliness. After his sister passed away years ago, the world had grown quieter for him. He had money, but no one to share it with. That evening was colder than usual. The sky had turned a dull gray and the wind carried the smell of rain. Eli had just wrapped up a long day visiting one of his old rental properties on the other side of town. He was tired, hungry, and his jacket couldn't quite keep out the chill. He decided to stop at a small diner he liked, the kind of place that still served hot soup in metal bowls and coffee that smelled stronger than it tasted. As he parked his truck and walked toward the entrance, something caught his eye near the back alley. A young woman sat by the dumpster, her knees pulled to her chest, wrapped in an oversized hoodie that looked like it had once been white. Her hair was messy, her hands red from the cold. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't even looking around. She was just sitting there, staring at the wet pavement as though it held all the answers to her problems. Eli hesitated. He'd seen people like her before, plenty of them. He always felt bad but never got involved. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how to help without crossing lines. Most people just walked by. He almost did too. But as he reached for the diner door, he heard a small sound. It wasn't even a full cry, more like someone trying to hold one back. Something inside him paused. He turned and walked toward her. She noticed him right away and flinched slightly, as if she thought he was going to yell. But Eli spoke softly. He asked if she was okay, if she wanted something warm to eat. She shook her head quickly, mumbling that she didn't want to cause trouble. Her voice was soft, almost polite despite her situation. He told her he was going inside to grab a meal and that she could join him if she wanted. For a moment, she looked like she might say no, but her stomach made a quiet growl that betrayed her. Finally, she nodded. Inside the diner, the waitress gave Eli a curious look when he walked in with the girl. The place wasn't fancy, but everyone there looked clean and well-dressed. He asked for 2 hot soups, bread, and tea. The girl sat quietly across from him, her hands wrapped around the warm cup even before drinking it. After a few minutes, Eli asked her name. She said it was Lena. She avoided eye contact most of the time, answering his questions carefully as if she wasn't sure how much to say. From what little she shared, he learned that she had been homeless for a few weeks, sleeping in a park not far from the diner. She had lost her job at a small grocery store after missing too many shifts. She said she had been sick and couldn't afford to see a doctor. Eli listened without interrupting. There was something different about her. Many people in her situation had hardened expressions, but she still looked gentle, almost shy. He could tell she was embarrassed. Every time someone glanced their way, she lowered her head and hid her hands in her sleeves. When the food came, she ate slowly, savoring every bite. Eli told her to eat as much as she wanted. He didn't press her for more details about her past. After they finished, he asked where she planned to go that night. She hesitated before saying she'd probably go back to the park if it didn't rain too hard. That answer hit him harder than he expected. He looked out the window. The sky was already turning darker, and the rain was coming down heavier. He couldn't just leave her out there. He didn't know why he cared so much. Maybe it was the way she reminded him of his sister when she was younger. The same soft-spoken tone, the same way of saying thank you like it meant more than it should. He told her quietly that if she needed a shower or a warm place for the night, she could come to his house. She froze, eyes widening. He quickly explained that he had a spare room, plenty of food, and that he only wanted to help. Still, she looked hesitant. It was clear she didn't trust people easily. Who could blame her? The world hadn't been kind to her. After a few long seconds, she finally nodded. She whispered, "Just for the night." Eli smiled gently and agreed. The ride home was mostly silent. The wipers brushed away sheets of rain as the truck rolled through quiet streets. Lena sat with her hands in her lap, watching the lights blur outside the window. Eli could sense her nervousness, so he spoke softly about the weather, about how the town used to flood years ago. She nodded occasionally but said little. When they reached his house, she seemed almost afraid to step out. It wasn't a mansion, but it was warm and well kept. a neat two-bedroom place on the edge of town with a small porch and a garden Eli barely maintained anymore. He turned on the lights and told her to make herself comfortable. Lena stood at the doorway for a long time, taking in the warmth. He noticed her eyes darting around like she was trying to memorize every detail. Eli went to the laundry room and brought her a clean towel and an old sweater. He told her she could use the shower, that the bathroom was at the end of the hall. She thanked him quietly and disappeared down the hallway, clutching the towel like it was something precious. When the water started running, Eli sat down at the kitchen table. He stared at the steam rising from his cup of tea, wondering if he had done the right thing. Inviting a stranger into his home wasn't something he'd ever imagined doing, but something about her made him feel protective. He didn't see a stranger. He saw someone lost, like a part of himself he hadn't looked at in years. As he waited, he noticed something he hadn't felt in a long time. The sound of life in his house. The water running, footsteps faintly moving, small noises that reminded him he wasn't alone. It was strange but comforting. When Lena finally came out, Eli looked up, and for a second he couldn't speak. She looked completely different. Her hair, though still a bit tangled, was clean and soft. Her face looked younger, her skin fairer without the layer of dirt and exhaustion. The oversized sweater hung loosely on her, and her eyes looked clearer, though still tired. He said she looked better, and she smiled faintly, mumbling that she hadn't felt clean in weeks. She sat at the table, and for the first time since they met, she looked at him properly. There was something gentle in her gaze, something that made him think of his sister, the one he had lost years ago in a car accident. As he poured her some tea, he noticed a small scar on her wrist. It was thin but long, like an old injury. For a moment he froze. He knew that scar. It looked almost identical to one his sister had as a child, a scar she'd gotten when she fell off her bike on their old street. He tried not to stare, but Lena noticed. She quickly pulled down her sleeve, embarrassed. Eli realized how strange it would sound to bring it up, so he said nothing. But inside, a thought began forming, a memory long buried. They talked a little more that night. She told him bits about her childhood, how she'd been in and out of different homes, never really knowing her family. She said she remembered a woman who used to sing her to sleep when she was small, but she wasn't sure if that was a dream or a real memory. Eli listened carefully, his heart tightening with every word. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but everything she said, the place she was born, her age, the faint memories, all lined up in ways that didn't feel like coincidence. Eventually, she yawned. He showed her to the guest room and told her she could rest as long as she needed. She looked at him and said softly that she didn't remember the last time someone had spoken to her kindly. Then she said, "Thank you," the kind of thank you that felt heavy with emotion. After she closed the door, Eli sat on the couch, staring into the dim light of the living room. The rain tapped against the windows, and he couldn't stop thinking about that scar. His mind kept drifting back to the day his sister's little girl had gone missing after the accident that took her mother's life. The authorities had searched for months, but no one ever found the child. Eli had lived with that pain for years. Could it really be her? He told himself it was impossible, but the thought wouldn't leave. He stayed awake for hours, staring at the hallway where her light was still faintly visible under the door. For some reason, he felt a strange peace in knowing she was safe, whoever she was. Maybe fate had led her to him for a reason. As the night deepened, Eli finally leaned back in his chair, whispering a quiet prayer he hadn't said in years. He didn't ask for answers, only for the strength to do what was right. Because something told him that this meeting wasn't by chance. It was the beginning of something he didn't yet understand. In the quiet of that small, warm house, two people who had been lost in different ways had crossed paths, one looking for a place to rest, the other searching for a reason to feel alive again. Neither of them knew it yet, but their lives had just changed forever. Eli woke up the next morning earlier than usual. For a moment, he forgot that someone else was in his house. The smell of rain still hung in the air, and the soft sound of dripping water came from the eaves outside. He rubbed his eyes, made coffee, and sat by the window, lost in thought. Then he remembered Lena. He stood quietly in the hallway, not wanting to wake her. When he peeked in, she was still asleep on the guest bed, curled up under the blanket like a small child. The sight did something to him, and it softened him. She looked peaceful, and for the first time in what might have been months, she probably felt safe. Eli closed the door gently and went back to the kitchen. He decided to make breakfast. Nothing fancy, just eggs, toast, and fruit. As he cooked, he thought about the night before, about that strange scar and everything she had said. The idea that she could somehow be related to him seemed crazy, but his heart refused to dismiss it. When Lena woke up, the smell of breakfast filled the air. She stepped into the kitchen shyly, wearing the same sweater from last night. Her hair was still a little damp from the shower. Eli greeted her warmly and offered her a seat. She thanked him again for letting her stay. Her voice was still soft, but there was a little more life in it now. As they ate, he asked how she slept. She smiled faintly and said it felt like the first time in a long while that she wasn't afraid someone would steal her things or wake her up in the middle of the night. He told her she could stay for a few more days if she needed. That made her eyes widen. She said she didn't want to be a burden. Eli shook his head and said, "You're not." The next few days passed quietly. She helped around the house without being asked, washing dishes, sweeping the floor, watering the plants that had nearly dried out on the porch. Eli noticed how careful she was with everything, as if she didn't want to break anything or take up too much space. He began learning small things about her. How she loved the sound of rain, how she used to read books in libraries just to stay warm, how she once dreamed of becoming a nurse before her life fell apart. He listened without judgment, only offering small comments to make her smile. At night, he'd sit in his chair with a book, and she'd sometimes join him on the couch, watching the flickering TV light dance on the walls. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. Still, that question in his mind kept returning. Who exactly was she? He couldn't ignore the coincidence of her name, her age, and that scar. He began searching quietly for any record of her past, looking through old documents he had from when his sister passed away, even calling an old friend who once worked in child services. Each time he found something small, a date, a report, a missing child notice. The puzzle started to form a picture he wasn't ready to believe just yet. One evening, it began raining heavily again. The house felt warm and alive. Lena was sitting at the kitchen table, sewing a button back onto one of Eli's shirts she found in the laundry. She worked carefully, humming a tune so softly that Eli almost didn't notice. He asked her where she learned to sew like that. She smiled and said she didn't really remember, but she thought maybe her mother used to do it and she must have picked it up. Something about that sentence hit Eli right in the chest. His sister had loved sewing. She used to hum the same way while mending clothes for him when they were kids. He didn't say anything then, but his hands trembled slightly as he poured tea. Later that night, as Lena got ready to sleep, Eli sat in his study looking through an old box of photos. There it was, a small faded picture of his sister holding her little girl on the porch of their old house. The child's hair, her eyes, her smile, they all looked so much like Lena. His heart began to race. He whispered to himself, "It can't be. It's been so many years." The next morning, he tried to act normal. He made breakfast, talked about the weather, and pretended not to be distracted. But Lena noticed. She asked if something was wrong. He smiled and said he just hadn't slept well. As the day went on, he found himself watching her in small moments. The way she held her cup, how she tucked her hair behind her ear when she read, how she tilted her head when she was curious. So many little things reminded him of his sister that it became almost painful. That afternoon, while cleaning the living room, Lena found an old photo frame on a shelf. It was dusty, the glass cracked in one corner. Inside was a picture of a woman holding a baby, the same photo Eli had looked at the night before. Lena smiled and asked who they were. Eli froze for a moment, then said quietly, "That's my sister and her daughter." Lena stared at the picture for a long time. Her fingers traced the edge of the frame. Something flickered in her eyes, confusion mixed with recognition. "She looks familiar," she said softly, almost to herself. Eli's heart skipped. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions right then, but he stopped himself. He didn't want to scare her. Instead, he asked gently, "Do you remember anything about your mother?" She shook her head. "Not really. Sometimes I see flashes. A house with blue curtains, a garden with flowers, someone singing to me. But I don't know if it's real or just something I made up." Eli's throat tightened. His sister's house had blue curtains. She had loved gardening. She used to sing the same lullaby every night. After she went to bed, Eli sat alone for hours, staring at the photo and then at the closed door down the hallway. The connection was becoming too strong to ignore. He needed to know the truth, for both their sakes. The next day, he went into town under the excuse of running errands. He visited the local records office, then made a call to an adoption center in another city. He didn't tell Lena any of this. He just said he'd be back by evening. By the time he returned home, the sky was pink with sunset. Lena was sitting on the porch steps, feeding a stray cat that had wandered into the yard. When she saw him, she smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. For a moment, all his doubts melted away. Even if she wasn't who he thought, she deserved the chance to start over. That evening, she helped him cook dinner. It was simple, rice and vegetables, but it felt like a family meal. She laughed once or twice quietly, and that sound filled the whole house with something Eli hadn't felt in years. Later that night, after she went to sleep, Eli sat at his desk and went through the information he'd gathered. What he found made his hands shake. There had indeed been a missing child case years ago after his sister's accident. The child's name, date of birth, and even the small scar on her wrist, everything matched. But he needed proof, something undeniable. The idea of a DNA test crossed his mind, but how could he ask without revealing what he suspected? He didn't want to make her feel like some experiment. He had to find a way that wouldn't scare her. The following morning, Lena woke up early and made breakfast herself. She told Eli she wanted to do something to thank him, even if it was small. He smiled and said just seeing her eat and smile again was thanks enough. She blushed a little at that and said she would find a way to repay him someday. They spent that day doing simple things, fixing a loose shelf, cleaning the yard, running errands together. Eli realized how easy it was to talk to her now. She had started opening up more, laughing more often and asking him questions about his life too. She seemed genuinely curious about him, how he became an investor, why he lived alone, what he liked to do. He told her bits and pieces about his life, but left out the part about his sister. He didn't want to bring it up until he was sure. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the rain start again, Lena turned to him and said something that stayed with him. She said, "You know, before I met you, I thought nobody in this world cared if I disappeared. I used to look at people walking by and think, maybe I was invisible. But you saw me. I don't know why, but you did. And it changed something inside me." Eli didn't know what to say. He felt a lump rise in his throat. All he could manage was a quiet, "Everyone deserves to be seen." That night, long after she had gone to bed, he sat awake, holding the papers he had found and the old photo in his hands. His heart was heavy, full of both fear and hope. He decided then he would find a way to confirm the truth, but gently. He owed her that much. He didn't realize it yet, but Lena had already started changing him too. His house, once silent and cold, now felt alive. The walls no longer echoed emptiness. There was laughter sometimes, small talks, the sound of someone moving around. For a man who had lived years in quiet, it felt like rediscovering what it meant to care. He thought about his sister that night, about the promise he made at her grave years ago, that he would never stop hoping that her child was alive somewhere, even if the world had forgotten. Maybe fate had brought that promise full circle. Maybe this was his chance to make things right. Outside, the rain poured steadily. Inside, Eli sat alone in the glow of a small lamp, listening to the sound of her soft footsteps in the other room, and whispered, "If you're really her, I'll take care of you, no matter what." And though he didn't know it yet, the truth was already closer than he imagined. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains and spread a soft glow across the living room. Eli stood by the window with his cup of coffee, watching the garden. The small plants that had once been dry now looked alive again, thanks to Lena. She had taken it upon herself to care for them, watering them daily, removing weeds, and arranging the small flower pots neatly. It amazed him how much life she brought into his quiet home in such a short time. As he watched her through the window that morning, he couldn't help but smile. She was sitting on the porch steps, barefoot, humming softly as she refilled a bowl for the stray cat that kept coming around. It was such a simple scene, but something about it filled him with peace. Lena had changed a lot since that first night. Her face looked brighter, her voice more confident. She laughed sometimes now, softly but genuinely. Yet, there were still moments when he caught her staring into space, her expression distant like her mind was somewhere else entirely. He knew she was still carrying heavy memories. That morning when she came inside, Eli told her he had to run into town for a meeting with a client. Lena offered to clean up while he was gone. He told her she didn't have to, but she insisted, saying it helped her keep her thoughts calm. He smiled and agreed. On his way into town, Eli couldn't shake the thought of the photo and the records he had found. He knew he couldn't keep quiet forever. He needed to know the truth. The last piece of confirmation he needed was something official, something scientific. After much hesitation, he decided to contact a clinic that could run a DNA test. He explained the situation carefully, leaving out personal details. The staff told him it was possible. He'd just need a small sample like a hair strand or a swab from both individuals. When he returned home, Lena greeted him with a bright smile. The house smelled of lemon cleaner and the floor looked spotless. He thanked her sincerely, and she looked almost shy at the compliment. Later that evening, as they sat down for dinner, Lena mentioned something that caught Eli's attention. She said she had seen a strange dream, a dream about a woman singing to her while brushing her hair. The woman's voice had been soft and full of love. Lena said she couldn't see her face clearly, but the sound made her feel safe. Eli's chest tightened. His sister had done the same for her little girl. Every night before bed, she would brush her hair and hum the same tune. He remembered it clearly because it used to echo through the walls when he visited. He asked softly if she remembered the song. She thought for a moment, then hummed a few notes. The melody was faint, almost forgotten, but familiar enough that it made his eyes sting. It was the same lullaby. Lena stopped when she saw his expression. She asked if something was wrong, but Eli quickly smiled and said it just reminded him of his childhood. He didn't want to overwhelm her. As the night went on, he debated with himself about the test. He didn't want her to feel like a subject of investigation. She had been through enough. But he also couldn't ignore the chance that she was truly his sister's daughter, the little girl everyone had given up hope of finding. A few days later, Eli decided to act carefully. He went to the store and bought a new hairbrush, saying he wanted to get her something since she kept using an old one. When she used it later, a few hair strands naturally got caught in it. He took it gently afterward, feeling a pang of guilt but convincing himself it was for a good reason. He sent it to the clinic along with his own sample, labeling them quietly. The technician told him it would take about 2 weeks to get the results. Those 2 weeks felt longer than any he had ever lived. Each day he went through his normal routines, checking on properties, managing calls, cooking meals, but everything felt heavier. At night, when the house went quiet, his thoughts grew louder. He imagined what it would mean if it were true. What would he say to her? How could he explain that she had family all along and no one knew? Meanwhile, Lena was beginning to feel more at home. She told Eli she wanted to start looking for a job, something simple just to start rebuilding her life. He offered to help her find one, but she said she wanted to do it on her own first. He admired her determination. She borrowed his laptop to check listings, and he could see the small spark of hope in her eyes. She applied for a position at a nearby cafe, and within a few days she got an interview. When she came back that afternoon with the news that she'd been hired, she was glowing. Eli congratulated her, proud and a little emotional. He hadn't seen her this happy before. She said she wanted to start saving money so she could eventually rent her own place. He nodded, though deep down, part of him didn't want her to leave. The house had felt warmer since she came. Her first day at work came quickly. She woke up early, made breakfast for both of them, and left with nervous excitement. When she returned in the evening, she was tired but smiling. She told him the other workers were kind and that it felt good to be doing something again. Eli listened to her talk about the customers, the coffee machines, and the cheerful manager. That night he realized something important. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to live again. A few days later, Eli received a call from the clinic. His hands trembled as he answered. The voice on the other end said the results were ready and asked if he wanted them emailed or collected in person. He decided to go there himself. As he drove to the clinic, his mind raced with possibilities. What if he was wrong? What if she wasn't related at all and he had built a story out of loneliness and hope? But deep inside, he already felt the answer. When he arrived, the receptionist handed him an envelope. His name and a small reference number were printed neatly on it. For a long time, he just sat in his truck in the parking lot, staring at it. His fingers shook as he opened it. The words were clear. There was no mistake. The results confirmed a biological match. Lena was his niece, his sister's long-lost daughter. He sat there in silence, his heart pounding. Tears welled in his eyes, but they weren't from sadness. It was relief, disbelief, and gratitude all at once. After so many years of not knowing, of wondering what happened to that little girl, fate had brought her right back into his life. On the drive home, memories flooded his mind. His sister's laughter, her promises, the day she told him she would always protect her child no matter what. She hadn't been able to keep that promise, but somehow through all the twists of life, he was now in a position to do it for her. When he got home, Lena was already there, sitting on the couch reading a book she had borrowed from the library. She looked up and smiled when he walked in. He tried to smile back, but his throat was too tight to speak. She noticed right away that something was different. She asked if he was okay. Eli took a deep breath and sat across from her. For a moment, he couldn't find the words. Finally, he said softly, "There's something I need to tell you, something important." Lena looked nervous. He reassured her it wasn't bad, then slowly explained what he had discovered, how he had recognized the scar, remembered the photo, checked the records, and finally, how the DNA test confirmed what he had begun to suspect. At first, she didn't react. She just stared at him, her face pale as if trying to process everything. Then her eyes filled with tears. She shook her head slightly, whispering that it couldn't be true. Eli reached across the table and gently placed the envelope in her hands. She opened it, her hands trembling, and read the paper. Her eyes moved slowly over the words. When she finally looked up, tears streamed down her cheeks. "I had a family?" she whispered. Eli's voice broke as he said, "You always did. You just didn't know it. You're my sister's daughter, my niece." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Then quietly, Lena stood and walked around the table. She sat beside him and buried her face against his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her, and for the first time in years, Eli cried. Not the kind of tears that come from pain, but the kind that wash away years of emptiness. They sat like that for a long time, the weight of years slowly lifting between them. Later that night, Lena sat with him on the porch, the paper still in her hands. She said she had always wondered why she felt like she didn't belong anywhere. She used to think she was invisible because maybe no one wanted her. But now, knowing the truth, she said she finally understood. She wasn't lost. She had just been waiting to be found. Eli told her that his sister had loved her more than anything, that losing her had broken the whole family. He said he had never stopped hoping she was alive somewhere. Lena listened with tears in her eyes, holding his hand tightly. The sky above them was clear that night, the stars scattered like tiny promises. Eli looked up and whispered quietly, "You're home now." Lena leaned against his shoulder, nodding. For the first time in her life, she believed it. The next few days after Eli told Lena the truth were filled with quiet emotions neither of them could easily describe. The house felt different. It wasn't just a place where two strangers happened to live anymore. It had turned into something that resembled a home. For Lena, it was like walking through a dream she had never dared to hope for. For Eli, it was like rediscovering a missing piece of his family he thought was gone forever. That morning, Lena stood in the kitchen making breakfast. The smell of toasted bread and coffee filled the air. Eli came down the stairs slowly, watching her move around with a new kind of calm in her steps. There was still a trace of disbelief in her eyes whenever she looked at him, like she couldn't quite grasp that this man sitting across the table was her uncle, her real family. They ate together quietly, both lost in their thoughts. After a while, Eli spoke softly, telling her that he wanted to show her something that afternoon. Lena nodded, curious but didn't ask questions. Later, they drove out of town, past the familiar streets and stores, until they reached a small, peaceful cemetery at the edge of the city. Eli parked near a large oak tree and got out. Lena followed him, her heart beating a little faster when she realized where they were. They walked slowly through the narrow path lined with grass and old stones, until Eli stopped near a simple white headstone. He looked down at it for a moment before speaking. "This is your mother," he said quietly. Lena froze. Her throat tightened as her eyes fell on the name carved into the stone. She ran her fingers gently across it, whispering the name she had never known until that moment. Her eyes blurred with tears. She knelt down, tracing the letters again and again as if she were trying to memorize them. Eli stood beside her, his eyes wet too. He told her stories about her mother, how she was stubborn and kind, how she loved to dance in the rain when they were kids, and how she used to bake apple pies every Sunday. He told her how much she loved her daughter, how she never gave up searching even when everyone else thought it was too late. Lena listened quietly, her tears falling freely. It felt like meeting her mother for the first time, not through photographs or memories, but through the love and words of someone who had known her deeply. For a long time she didn't speak. She just stayed there, her hand resting on the cold stone as if trying to connect with the woman she had lost too soon. When they finally left the cemetery, the sun was setting behind them. The orange sky looked peaceful. In the car, Lena stared out the window, lost in thought. She finally said, "I wish you could see us now." Eli smiled faintly and said, "She can. I believe she never stopped watching over you." Back home, Lena went to her room and opened the small box Eli had given her earlier that day. Inside was an old photo, her mother holding her as a baby, smiling brightly at the camera. It was the first time Lena had ever seen her own baby picture. She touched the photo gently, then placed it on the nightstand beside her bed. That night, she fell asleep with a sense of peace she had never felt before. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. Lena continued working at the cafe, and Eli noticed how she was becoming more confident with each passing day. Customers liked her friendly attitude, and her manager said she had a natural kindness that made people comfortable. She started saving money, even though Eli told her she didn't need to worry about expenses for now. One evening, when she came home from work, Eli was sitting in the living room with some papers spread across the table. He looked up and smiled, asking her to sit down. He told her he had been thinking about her future, about how she deserved a real chance to build the life she wanted. He explained that he wanted to open a small business with her, a little bakery and coffee shop in town, something they could run together. At first, Lena was speechless. She had never imagined owning anything, let alone running a place like that. But Eli said it wasn't just a business idea. It was a way for her to keep her mother's memory alive since she used to love baking. They spent the next few weeks planning everything. They found a small corner space near the park that had been empty for months. The rent wasn't too high, and Eli said he would handle the investment part. He told Lena she could take charge of the creative side, naming the shop, designing the space, and deciding the menu. The sparkle in her eyes when she talked about it made him realize just how much this meant to her. They decided to name the place Willow's Corner, after the tree that stood near her mother's grave. It felt right, gentle, strong, and full of quiet life. Renovations began soon after. Every day after work, Lena would join Eli at the shop to paint, clean, and decorate. They laughed over spilled paint, argued playfully about furniture, and stayed up late planning. For Eli, those evenings were the happiest he had felt in years. The house no longer echoed with silence. It was filled with life, purpose, and laughter again. One evening, while they were finishing up the final touches inside the shop, Lena found an old box under the counter. Inside were a few faded photographs and a small diary left by the previous tenant. She sat on the floor, flipping through it, and smiled as she read small notes about customers, recipes, and dreams. It reminded her of how every place carried a story, just like people did. When the opening day finally arrived, Lena was both nervous and excited. She woke up early, dressed neatly, and stood by the shop door as the first customers walked in. Eli watched her greet them with a warm smile and couldn't help but feel proud. She moved around the counter with ease, handing out coffee, chatting with people, and making sure everyone felt welcome. By noon, the place was full. Word had spread quickly that a new cafe had opened, and people from the neighborhood came to check it out. Many complimented the cozy atmosphere, the homemade pastries, and the soft music playing in the background. For Lena, it was more than just success. It was proof that she could rebuild her life. When the day finally ended, she and Eli sat in the quiet shop, tired but happy. She looked around at the warm lights, the smell of coffee lingering in the air, and said softly, "We did it." Eli smiled and nodded, saying, "No, you did it." That night, as she locked up and turned off the lights, Lena stood by the window looking out at the street. For a long moment she thought about the first day she had met Eli, standing outside in the rain, tired, hungry, and scared. She remembered how he had simply offered her kindness without expecting anything in return. It had changed everything. If he hadn't opened that door, she might never have found her way back to her family, to herself. Back home, Eli sat in his study looking through old family albums. He added a new picture at the end, a photo of him and Lena standing in front of Willow's corner smiling. It felt like closing a circle that had been open for far too long. As days turned into weeks, their bond grew stronger. They spent evenings cooking together, talking about her plans for the future and sometimes sharing quiet memories of the past. But amid the joy, Eli sometimes noticed moments when Lena would grow quiet, when she would look out the window for too long or suddenly fall silent during a conversation. One night, as they sat on the porch, he gently asked her what was on her mind. She hesitated at first, then said softly that even though she was happy now, there were things from her past she still couldn't forget. Nights of fear, hunger, and loneliness. She said sometimes she still woke up feeling like she might lose it all again. Eli listened quietly. Then he told her something that stayed with her. Healing isn't forgetting. It's learning to remember without being broken by it. She nodded slowly, letting those words sink in. Over the following months, things continued to get better. The cafe grew more popular and Lena's smile became brighter. She started volunteering once a week at a local shelter, helping other young people who were going through what she once faced. She never told them her full story, but her kindness spoke louder than any words could. Eli watched her grow with a quiet pride that filled his heart. Sometimes he would stand in the shop doorway, watching her laugh with customers and think about how life had brought them together in the most unexpected way. He had opened his door to a stranger, and in return, she had brought light back into his world. One rainy evening, almost a year after they first met, Lena came home carrying a small box. She handed it to Eli and told him to open it. Inside was a framed photo, the same picture of her and him in front of the cafe, but beneath it, she had written something in neat handwriting. "For the man who gave me more than a home, who gave me back my life." Eli's eyes filled with tears. He placed the frame on the mantel, next to a photograph of his sister. He looked at both pictures, one from the past, one from the present, and whispered a quiet thank you. That night, they sat together on the porch again, listening to the sound of rain. The house glowed softly behind them, and the world outside felt peaceful. For the first time in years, everything felt complete. Eli turned to her and said, "Your mother would be proud." Lena smiled, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I hope so," she said. "I finally feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be." Eli nodded. "You are," he said. "You were meant to come home." The morning light spilled softly through the curtains of the little house, touching everything in golden warmth. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen, mixing with the quiet hum of the world waking up. Lena stood by the window, holding her cup with both hands, watching the street below. The air was cool, and the early sunlight touched the roofs gently. It had been a year since she first walked into Eli's life, a cold, rainy night that had changed everything for both of them. She could still remember that moment clearly, standing outside, afraid and tired, not knowing that one act of kindness would lead her to find her family, her home and herself. Now the same world that once felt so cruel seemed softer somehow. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. Downstairs, Eli was sitting at the table going through papers for their cafe, Willow's Corner. The business had been doing well, better than either of them had expected. Customers came not just for the coffee or pastries, but because they loved the atmosphere. People said it felt warm, like stepping into a friend's home. That warmth came from Lena's kindness. She talked to everyone with genuine care, remembered their stories, and treated them like people, not customers. That morning, she came downstairs and sat beside Eli. He looked up and smiled. She could tell he hadn't been sleeping much. "You've been at those papers all morning," she said lightly. He chuckled softly. Old habits die hard. I used to do this all the time when I started investing. She looked at him closely. His hair had more gray now, and his eyes showed a quiet tiredness. But his smile was still the same, calm, steady, reassuring. I was thinking, he said, it's time for you to start taking more control of the cafe. You're ready. Lena blinked, surprised. You mean running it alone? He nodded. It's yours as much as it's mine. You've made it what it is. She shook her head slightly, almost nervous. I don't know if I can handle everything. You've done so much for me already. Eli smiled softly. You already are handling it. I just want you to trust yourself. There was a pause. Lena lowered her eyes to her cup, feeling a quiet mix of gratitude and fear. It wasn't about the business, it was about letting go of the safety she had found. She had built a new life with Eli's guidance, but now the idea of leading on her own scared her. He could sense that without her saying a word. I'll still be here, he added gently. Just let yourself grow. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She walked into the backyard where the small tree they had planted months ago stood tall under the moonlight. She remembered the day they planted it, both of them kneeling in the soil, laughing when the roots wouldn't settle straight. They'd said it symbolized second chances. Now, seeing how strong it had grown, she smiled softly. The next morning, she made her decision. She told Eli she would take full charge of the cafe's operations. He just nodded, smiling proudly. That's my girl, he said quietly. As weeks passed, Lena stepped into her new role with confidence she didn't know she had. She hired new staff, introduced new recipes, and even started a weekend event called Story Sundays, where people from the community could come share life stories, poems, or music. It became a local favorite. People loved how open and honest it felt, a space where no one judged anyone. Every Sunday evening, when the chairs were being stacked and the lights dimmed, Lena would look at the empty shop with a quiet joy. She loved seeing how people connected through small things, laughter, words, songs. It reminded her that kindness wasn't loud. It was something you could feel. Eli came by often, though he no longer managed things directly. He would sit by the window with a cup of coffee, reading or talking to customers who had come to know him. Everyone in the neighborhood respected him, the quiet man who had helped a young woman find her place in the world. He never told anyone the full story, and neither did she. Some things were meant to be kept close to the heart. One afternoon, Eli fell ill. It wasn't sudden, but it was enough to worry Lena. The doctor said he needed rest and less stress, so she made sure he stayed home while she managed everything at the cafe. Every evening after closing, she would visit him, cook dinner, and talk about her day. Sometimes he would listen quietly and smile. You remind me so much of your mother, he'd say. She had the same way of lighting up a room without even trying. Lena would smile shyly, brushing away a tear. I wish I remembered her more clearly, she said once. Eli reached out, holding her hand gently. She's still here, he whispered. In you. Days turned into months, and slowly Eli's health began to improve. He started taking short walks again, sometimes visiting the cafe early in the morning before it opened. He would sit at his favorite corner table, watching Lena sweep the floor, fix the flowers, and prepare the day with quiet dedication. Seeing her like that always filled him with peace. One chilly morning, as the first snow of the season fell, Lena decided to close the cafe early. The town looked beautiful under the soft white flakes. She walked home, her scarf wrapped tight, humming to herself. When she entered the house, she found Eli sitting by the fireplace with a small box in his hands. He looked up with a smile. Come here, he said. She sat beside him, curious. He opened the box slowly. Inside was a small golden pendant shaped like a heart with tiny initials engraved on it, LW. This was your mother's, he said. She wore it every day until the day she lost you. I kept it all these years, hoping I'd find you one day. Lena held the pendant in her hand, her eyes welling up. She turned it over and saw a faint scratch on the back, the same mark she remembered seeing on a locket once in a dream. For a moment, she couldn't speak. She just leaned forward and hugged him tightly. They stayed like that for a long time, the fire crackling softly beside them. That night, as Lena lay in bed, she wore the pendant around her neck. She held it gently, feeling closer to her mother and to Eli than ever before. It was like carrying a piece of both of them with her. Winter passed and spring brought new beginnings again. The cafe expanded to include an outdoor garden section. People came to sit under the little willow trees Lena had planted, enjoying coffee and laughter. The shop had become a symbol of kindness and resilience, a place where second chances lived quietly in every smile. One day, a reporter visited the cafe after hearing about its community work. He wanted to write a small article for the local paper. Lena hesitated at first, but Eli encouraged her. "Tell your story," he said. "You never know who might need to hear it." So she did, carefully, without revealing everything. She talked about being homeless, about finding hope when she least expected it, and about the man who believed in her when no one else did. The article was short, but it touched people's hearts. Soon strangers began stopping by just to meet her, to tell her how her story inspired them. It wasn't fame she cared about. It was connection. She realized how powerful it was when someone shared kindness. It could ripple farther than anyone could imagine. One evening, Eli came to the cafe after closing. He looked around the place proudly, watching how beautiful it had become. "You did this," he said softly. Lena shook her head. "We did this." He smiled, then looked at her with that gentle expression she knew so well. "Promise me something," he said. "Promise me that no matter where life takes you, you'll never stop opening your door to others. Just like someone once opened theirs to you." She nodded, her voice quiet but firm. "I promise." Years went by and Willow's Corner continued to grow. Lena became known in town as someone who never turned away anyone in need. She hired young people from shelters, helped them learn skills, and gave them hope just like she had once been given. Eli grew older, and though his steps became slower, his heart remained full. Every evening he would sit under the willow tree in the cafe garden, sipping tea and watching people laugh. Sometimes Lena would join him, and they'd sit together in silence, watching life unfold. One evening, as the sky turned orange with sunset, he turned to her and said softly, "You've made this world a little kinder." Lena smiled through her tears. "You showed me how." Years later, when Eli passed away peacefully in his sleep, the whole town came to his memorial. People shared stories of how his kindness had touched them. A loan forgiven, advice given freely, a helping hand offered quietly. Lena stood beside his photograph, her eyes filled with love and gratitude. She knew he wasn't really gone. His lessons lived in her, in the cafe, in every person who had ever been touched by his generosity. After the memorial, she returned to Willow's Corner. She sat by his favorite table and placed a small candle there. The flame flickered softly, casting a warm glow across the room. She whispered quietly, "Thank you for finding me." Outside, the wind rustled through the willow trees. Almost like a reply, years continued to pass, and the cafe became something much bigger than either of them had dreamed. It became a shelter, a meeting place, a second home for many who had lost their way. People often asked Lena how it all began, and she would always smile and say, "With one small act of kindness." And on quiet nights, when she closed the shop and turned off the lights, she would stand at the window, look up at the stars, and remember that rainy night when everything changed.